Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shekhar Shah. I'm at the National Council of Applied Economic Research in New Delhi. I'm sorry I'm having to communicate with you through this video recording. My regrets and apologies that I cannot make it to what looks like it's going to be a very good full day of discussion on Asian trade strategies, and I wanted to both thank Peter Drysdale and his colleagues for asking me to do this, but also to put this very good group of people together. And it's my loss that I'm not going to be with you to partake of the very interesting discussions I'm sure you'll have. Peter asked me to talk for a few minutes about India's trade strategies, and there are many experts in your group who know a lot about it, but perhaps I could just add a few of my own thoughts to the discussion, particularly to the session that Peter said this might fit into, which is the session on TPP, RCEP, and regional trade choices. I just wanted to spend a minute or two going back on what has happened to India since it opened up in the early 90s. And if we look at the impact of trade on India, it's been a real game changer. India's share in world merchandise exports went up from 0.5% in 1980 to something like 1.7% in 2011. Its share in the export of services went up from around 0.8% in 1980 to something like 3.3% in 2011. India's own trade to GDP ratio really rose dramatically from about 15% in 1990 to about 26% in 2000, and in the last decade to now over 55%. These are remarkable numbers for a country that had remained closed for so long. And it's been a game changer not just in terms of these numbers, but also in terms of the qualitative changes that have happened in terms of the exposure to globalization, in terms of technology in certain areas, in terms of just the ability to navigate global waters. And we can see that particularly in the context of the Indian FDI going into some of the advanced countries, such as indeed in Australia, in some of the natural resource areas, but also in Europe and in the US and other countries. So trade really has been a game changer. The way in which this has happened is unilateral liberalization at home, and then riding on the multilateral trade agreements that India was a part of. But with the stalling of the Doha round, India in some sense came to a crossroads and began signing the free trade agreements and the comprehensive economic cooperation agreements that we have seen. India has already signed close to, I think, about 20 regional trade agreements and is engaged in negotiating several more. India signed an FTA with Thailand in 2003, economic agreement with Singapore thereafter, again another one with South Korea in 2009 and in Japan 2011, and it's discussing several more with Canada, with Indonesia, with Australia as well, with EU and with China. So this shift from multilateralism to bilateralism has happened in India without too much conscious strategic planning or thinking about it. And I think we see the consequences. We just received a letter from the Ministry of Finance the other day asking us if NCR would be willing to do a study that looks more strategically at what we are doing, what India is doing in signing up these various FTAs. And as one might expect, many in industry are complaining because there isn't clarity on rules of origin, on a whole range of issues that confront us. So I think a key requirement going forward for India's trade strategies to be far more rational and integrated and cohesive is going to be analytical work that tells us, or that explains and explores what India needs to do in this very different bilateral world, and indeed how India should then be approaching not the multilateral world, which seems now quite firmly stalled, but the plurilateral world of RCEP and TPP. In both these areas, I think there's a great deal of work that India needs to do, and I'm sure that institutions like mine and I hope partners that some of you represent will be called upon to work in this area. I think a key issue here is going to be how India will make the transition from a service-led trade expansion to hopefully something that is much more intensively manufacturing oriented. As some of us have discussed, including some of you who are in the audience today in Canberra, India really does need the kind of solid manufacturing growth if it is going to create the jobs that it needs for the over 200 million young people who will enter into the labor force and who are entering into the labor force in the ages of 15 to 24. So this represents both an opportunity and a massive challenge to be able to have access to markets, to be able to work through technological transformation, and to be able to put together the foreign direct investment and domestic investment in the infrastructure and other trade facilitation services that are required is going to be a very big challenge for India. So the being made a part of RCEP but not being a part of TPP, the more loosely federated arrangements that are being envisaged under RCEP and the much more comprehensive agreements and ideas that are going into TPP will pose challenges for India. That's in a kind of a quick rundown, nutshell, some of the issues that I think Indian trade strategists and the Indian government and indeed institutions like think tanks such as NCER are going to have to deal with. I look forward very much to a resume of your discussions. I'm sure Peter and his group, Shiro and others, will pull together a very nice summary of the discussions, and I wish your discussions the most productive time that you spend on this at the conference that you're at. Thank you, and thank you for listening.